Matthew Stanley with that report. One of the groups involved in the CSIRO forum was the Australian Association for the Study of Peak Oil and Gas. It believes that the planet's oil production will peak in a couple of years and start going into decline. The organisation's Phil Hart says international energy agencies have failed to anticipate the current situation of high prices and will soon dramatically revise down their predictions of future oil production. I spoke with him earlier today. Phil Hart, petrol prices went up 15 cents a litre this week. Is that directly linked to oil supply?
The volatility during the week is obviously part of it, the unique Australian retail market, but the overall story that we've seen over the last few months and even the last few years is very much about the trouble that the world is having producing oil to meet our demand.
As a worst case scenario, petrol could cost $8 a litre within a decade. Where do you get that kind of figure from?
So the CSIRO Future Fuels Forum has involved a lot of groups from industry, government and NGOs like the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. That group has modelled a set of scenarios looking at different oil production forecasts and different levels of response, both in terms of people changing their choices about driving and also the level of technology response to the problem. So the $8 a litre is the worst case scenario if we don't tackle the problem and if we leave it too late to start dealing with it.
And it is an attention-grabbing figure, isn't it? So, I mean, is this the sort of shock tactic that we need to get people to take action?
There's certainly no intention that we would come up with a shock scenario. That was just an output from the models that CSIRO run, and it's a very real output from the best models they can put together. So we need to treat that with a lot of seriousness and take the message away that we need to start serious action now.
What would you say to the peak oil sceptics and to suggestions that this is just scaremongering?
I think the evidence for the peak oil sceptics is out there already. The predictions, I mean, from the peak oil sceptics is every year for the last 5 years they've said that oil prices were going to come down, and we're not seeing that response. I think all the evidence out there is that the oil market's getting tighter. The large oil fields, which have been the mainstay for our production for so long, are really struggling, and it doesn't matter which area you look at. The new sources of oil supply are small in comparison to these these giant fields which have sort of underpinned global oil supply for the last few decades.
I would imagine too that that's making some oil companies fairly nervous, the talk of such high petrol prices.
Yeah, I mean, the oil companies find themselves in a pretty tricky situation. On the one hand, they're making a lot of profits, but on the other hand, they're seeing a difficult future ahead. Both the car companies and the oil companies are in a very dynamic period. It's not like it's no longer a case of business as it used to be. They've got to adapt to a new future.
Okay, so what are the options? Are biofuels the answer necessarily?
Biofuels is a very broad spectrum. There are some sort of small-scale biofuels which we can certainly tackle and don't do too much harm. But if we look at what's going on in the US at the moment, taking 1/3 of the corn crop to meet just a 1% or 2% of the US transport demand, that's really the wrong approach, and we've got to try and steer away from that as a solution.
So you're advocating for quite a lot of change to deal with a limited oil supply, but invariably that's going to cost a lot of money. How do you see that we would be able to meet those costs?
Look, I mean, some of the costs some of the options of reducing our oil consumption actually cost nothing at all. So a lot of the behavioural changes and the choices about where we live and how we commute to work cost almost nothing and can have an immediate impact. So they're the ones we need to get after first. Certainly the investment in public transport infrastructure are big sums of money, but the government is already making choices about where it spends its money, and we need to take the money that we're spending on large investment in roads and make sure that's being invested in the right areas that actually help us solve this problem rather than making it worse.
But Phil Hart, they're not choices that are available to every person. What would you say to somebody who lived in a rural area, didn't have access to public transport and could only use a car to get to where they needed to be? Yep,
so there are certainly, by leaving it late to deal with peak oil, we're creating some tough problems, and we don't do anybody any favours by pretending that there are easy solutions or that there are easy fixes. We need to own up to the fact we've got a difficult problem, and that we need to try and find ways of compensating people who are in difficult situations and make it work for them.
And what's the role of government in all of this?
Government has a huge role to play in sending the right signals and setting the right policies. And I guess, yeah, being honest with the Australian community that both because of climate change and peak oil, that we have to proactively bring down our oil consumption and the way we use our cars.
Phil Hart, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.